I want to welcome everybody. This is the Mayor's Forum, formerly the Community Chat with the Mayor. I retweaked it. We do it once a month, fourth Tuesday at 5:30. And we usually have a cameo or a guest speaker each month to talk about, I want to say, hot topics. This month we have with us Adam Wolf, who's our head of planning. And I kind of like to start these off by, Adam, can you just kind of give us the 3-minute spiel on who you are, your life history, all that fun stuff, so people kind of know you.
Wow, 3 minutes spiel. Wow, this is the hardest part, hardest 3 minutes.
I can give you 5.
No, thanks, Fred. I appreciate the opportunity, really. I think I know a lot of people who have been joining some of these calls, at least under in the last year, and then over just, having now worked for the town since 2014. So I'm getting up there in tenure. But most of you know, and some of you don't, but I was actually born and raised just next door in Mill Valley. Went up through the public school system there. My folks are actually still in the house they bought in 1970 up on the hill toward Four Corners. And actually just celebrated my birthday with them and my boys yesterday up on Mount Tam. So it was felt full circle type of experience, just having spent so much time on Mount Tam as a kid and in my 20s, and now being able to do it again. But anyway, so up through, went to Tam High, graduated Tam High, and I think sort of got my interest in urban planning at a young age. Just fell in love with maps and travels and all sorts of different visiting different cities. And ended up sort of after college, went to University of Washington, but after college went out and did some traveling, but then ultimately decided I needed to find some career path and sort of harness that sort of inner love of maps and geography and went off to graduate school for urban planning out in New York City, which is originally where my parents were from. Still have a lot of family out there. And spent 2 years graduate school there and started my career really in New York City, working for a neighborhood nonprofit in Brooklyn for a couple of years, working actually on affordable housing issues, and then started working for the city of New York for basically the next 10 years of my career. Ultimately working in the Manhattan borough office of their city planning department. And before coming here, I was the deputy director for planning in Manhattan for about 5 years before making the jump and coming home really to Corte Madera. So that's, I don't know, 3 that I brought my wife and 3 boys in tow. They're all now. I'm actually on my other screen. I will say, I was telling Todd before I jumped on the Little League. My son's playing a Little League game right now. He's 12 up in Petaluma. We're all up in Petaluma together. My oldest is about to turn 12, but he's 11. And then I have 2 other boys who are 8 and 7 at the moment. So that sort of, I guess, kind of wraps it up, other than at least my history prior to Corte Madera. And the other thing I combined, I'll say, I did grow up spent a lot of time in the Mill Valley Golf Course as a kid as well, just spending hours out there, sort of getting dropped off in the summertime in the morning, and then just spending, cruising around in the creeks and playing golf and whatnot out there at the golf course. And so still enjoy playing some golf, getting outside, sports and hiking and camping. We do some camping trips every year up in the mountains or out at the coast. So that's about it for me. I don't know. Anything else, Fred?
I got one question before I get into the real meaty questions, and that is New York more bureaucratic than Corte Madera?
Well, I'll just start with, I think there's something like over 200,000 employees or something in city employees in New York. So it's a small city itself. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's couldn't be more different in the sense that, everything, we had over 240 planners. Just think about that. So it's very specialized as you get into larger government bureaucracies. And so much different here than here, where we have the opportunity to sort of work on a variety of different issues and topics and get to know the people we're actually serving as well. So that's the great thing about being here in Corte Madera and working for the town.
Well, we're glad you came back home, that you chose Corte Madera to work out of. We appreciate that.
Thanks.
So two topics I want to see if we can cover. One is the housing element, and the other one is SB 9. So on the housing element, can you kind of give us an update where we're at? Because I know we've done a bunch of community meetings. It looks like you kind of have, not you, but town has kind of settled on somewhat on the sites we're looking at. I'll say the major sites. So if you kind of cover out where we're going next. And then I know I'm starting to hear a lot of concerns about, on some of these sites where you're looking at, larger sites, like potential, they're all potential sites. I'll throw that in, the movie theater, Macy's. What's the infrastructure going to look like? There's going to be increased traffic. Police and fire services come into play. How does that all intertwine if all of a sudden tomorrow, I know it won't happen tomorrow we have another 600 units of housing and they're compressed into like 8 or 9 sites? And then one other question, if you can answer too, because this has come up also a couple of times, which is totally off the wall, but it kind of makes sense. And that is, what happens if we just don't do the housing element and kind of tell the state where they could go type thing? Where does that kind of put us? So I'll let you figure out where to go.
Well,
I threw a lot at you.
I guess I'll start with sort of where we are in the process, because I think what we tried to do was really design a workshop series, and we had about 6 workshops, one a month. I think it was the second Wednesday of every month from October until March, and really tried to methodically go through a lot of these issues and have discussions and sort of not really get so deep into, one, I would say you need sort of six sessions to actually have an adequate conversation about the housing element and about housing issues in general. And so I think that was really the purpose, was to be educational in nature, to be informal, to be discussion oriented, and then also really start to drill down though on the actual state mandates and the requirements that we are operating under. And I say, this has been going on every 8 years for the last 4 decades or so. But so this isn't a new process. It sort of resurfaces a lot of the things that I think we hear about every 8 years, about concerns about growth in general. And so we've done our 6 workshops. I would encourage everybody to really go, and if you haven't seen those, to even take a look at the meeting summaries or to review some of those videos, because I do think they're really useful. As I just said, I'm not going to be able to capture everything, is what I'm trying to say, Fred, in a couple minutes here. But the next step is really to start the environmental analysis, which speaks to some of the things that you mentioned about infrastructure. That's the whole point of doing an environmental analysis, is what are the real potential effects of development here. And I will say, we're going to be analyzing, this isn't like a greenfield site that has nothing on it today. A lot of these locations, there's already traffic and other things and vehicles and uses in a lot of these locations. And then you're sort of theoretically analyzing the potential development at some point in the future. And so you're looking at sort of some of the net effects. So that's the environmental analysis is the next piece. We're going to have the first part of that is a scoping meeting, which basically invites members of the public at the very early part of this process to give us your thoughts about what we should be analyzing. What should the scope of this analysis be with respect to the housing that we are potentially going to see in the future and as part of this process, and as part of the regulations that will be changing. So that's going to be March 31st at 6:30. And invite those of you who are interested to attend. We also had an overview at our last workshop of what CEQA, what this environmental analysis is. And so what they do is actually look into a variety of topics: public services, police, fire, circulation or traffic analysis. We were just talking about that today, what intersections to look at. And so we'll get a sense of what potential effects these uses and this change will have on the environment in the town. And one of the things, though, just to note, we've been, and we presented, is that there are a lot of things that you do simultaneously with housing policy and that are continually being looked at and sort of assessed and analyzed and sort of planned alongside housing. So it is sort of comprehensive in nature. That's what planning's all about, right? It's about there's growth is going to happen. How do you manage that in a smart way is really what you're trying to accomplish. And so one of the considerations, obviously, we have to make sure that the town is looking at comprehensively at all these different areas. So we work closely with RJ and Public Works on infrastructure and solutions for traffic. We make sure that development pays some of its way, or if not more than some, tries to pay all of its way to improve whatever needs to be improved in terms of townwide infrastructure. Obviously, that includes you can see some of the recent development where we've talked about improving the pedestrian and cycling network for circulation. We've talked about thinking about climate adaptation at the same time you're thinking about new development. And there's other, certainly water is a big one, obviously. And water, this is something that the water district, obviously the town doesn't directly control the water supply. So the water district does. We're working along, we'll be providing input, but they're planning for increased water use. They're also planning for increased water efficiency, so using less water in our development as we grow. And certainly at the end of the day, if there isn't water, these developments can't be approved. And so I just think it's something to keep in mind that the water district actually controls that. That's come up time and again. So the environmental analysis is a big piece of the analysis of potential effects on infrastructure. And other than that, I think when you look at and you pull back, and I'll just mention this because this is sort of, I know, speaks to the regional aspect of why this is happening. The question is, if it doesn't come here, where does it go? Where does the growth come? And that is what, when you look at a region and you look at regional planning, I'm not trying to justify the sort of the numbers of the arena that we're getting, but this is sort of the thinking that goes on. It goes somewhere else. And are those areas where the development goes going to be better from an environmental standpoint, worse from an environmental standpoint? Are the people going to have to drive further? Are they closer to where they actually work? Those sorts of things start to drive sort of some of the other policy goals that I think are front and center. And as part of the housing policy, it's also part of the sort of the climate adaptation goals and some of the other issues that we're facing, needing to think about as well. So it's a long way to say, please, there's a lot to this. It's complex. Infrastructure is a very important thing that we need to keep front of mind. And then the last part, if we don't do this, okay, so this isn't, I'm sort of repeating sort of what I'm reading myself and what we've heard from what's sort of in state law now, and sort of have been increased penalties on cities, or possible penalties on cities that don't comply. And one of the key sort of, this ties to infrastructure as well. One of the key sort of, if you don't go ahead with the housing element, now state funding and regional funding for actual transportation improvements, actually, you don't qualify for a lot of the funding that comes from the state down to the region, MTC, down to the local TAM funding for projects in terms of improving infrastructure and making it easier. I think I'm going to lose my headphones here for a second. I'm going to switch to my other mic.
That's not due to the baseball game, is it?
No, unfortunately, it's just let me see if I can get this.
That work? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sounded better before, but we can still hear you.
Yeah, sorry. It's just out of headset battery. So I think I was saying that you're basically not likely to qualify for infrastructure funding, especially for transportation. More and more the state's trying to sync housing and transportation goals together. And really, again, that's tied to actually funneling funds for traffic and transportation improvements to where growth is occurring, where housing is actually being built. And if you don't go through with that, you're basically not going to qualify for any of that funding for transportation projects.
Okay.
Secondly, there's actual real potential financial penalties. There's fines. There's essentially the more legal aspect is you can be sued by not only any number of individuals or entities, but also now I believe even the state can also bring action against the town for not having a compliant housing element. And that ultimately can lead to loss of control, local control over land use decisions, again, financial penalties. These are all things we don't like to even go down that road and think about. But there's a number of penalties in regards to not having a compliant housing element. And that's actually, I think we have that on our FAQ in more detail. So those are ultimately I think the most significant consequences with respect to not actually getting to a compliant housing element or just foregoing doing it.
Okay. If anybody has any questions as we're going through this, please feel free to raise your hand, because some of this, again, it's questions, it's comments, and it's an open discussion type thing. So I do have two questions for you. One thing you said before, just make sure I have this clear. And I'm looking at totally worst case. If we remain in a drought which we're probably really trouble for the next 5 years, the water department can sit there, basically and somebody comes in saying, hey, I want to build X million units on a site. The water department could sit there and say, nope, sorry, you can't do that because we're in a drought, can't build. So theoretically, we could sit there and plan for 600 units on 7 sites and nothing could get built just because of the water department, right? And being in a drought.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's definitely a possibility. There's been moratoriums in the past. And so it just comes down to their planning and their supply. And ultimately, yes, in order for the town to issue a building permit, we have to have a will serve letter, it's called, from the water department that they will be able to serve those uses. And just, I think, yeah, so that's ultimately where it comes down to. I think there's other things that the water, I mean, that's one way for them to reduce the water use or make supply meet demand. There's obviously many other tools in their toolbox as well, as we've seen. And you know, when we had Carrie Pollard, water efficiency manager with MMWD, at our second workshop on our panel, she also raised the fact that new development is oftentimes much more water efficient than existing development, and single family homes are much more water intensive uses than multifamily homes on a household basis, household per if you look at it per household basis. So, those are some of the things they look at, but certainly other types of ordinances can be brought to bear by the Marin Municipal Water District, just depending on what their ability is to meet the demand and provide the supply.
Okay. And then on the environmental impact side of it, and again, it's all theoretical and hypothetical. If just say, okay, the movie theater gets built out and where Big Five is, that whole area gets built out, and that impact report shows that Tiamo Vista is going to get totally plugged with cars, what happens? Does that mean the town sits there and says, okay, we can go ahead and do these developments? Or does that mean the town has to look at how do we improve the infrastructure? And I'm just picking on cars. How do we improve the infrastructure to get cars moving? And after this, we'll go ahead and go to Barbara. But if you address, I want to see if there's any kind of like negative impacts. And again, I probably choose traffic more than anything else, because to me, that's the obvious. When you build more housing, there's more cars.
Well, what's interesting is we actually, we did study Tam Ridge, for example, in terms of traffic. 180 units, one of the, probably the biggest development that's been built in Corte Madera in a couple of decades, if not, since Madera del Presidio, I think, which even I think that was less than 100, maybe right around there. I forget exactly the number of units there. But we did the analysis showing before and afterwards, and it really, because of where it's located, because of the times that people move around with their vehicles, and especially going forward, I think a lot of this is changing too. It had really minimal impact on the intersections, even right at Warnham and Tamil Vista Boulevard. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do that. Residential development actually isn't a huge driver of vehicular traffic during the peak times. So there is that to really consider. But yes, to your point, if it does show that it will sort of push an intersection, and this is where the rules have changed a little bit with CEQA. We're no longer looking at intersection delays. And this gets we can have a whole meeting on this. We're not looking at intersection delays. We're looking at vehicle miles traveled, and that was precisely to address sort of what you're talking about, where we're trying to, or from a planning perspective, what was happening was development was occurring around transportation, public transit areas, whether it was San Francisco or Oakland or up in San Rafael, downtown San Rafael. But because the analysis was using intersection delays, it was creating impacts, even though those were the most logical places to put actual more housing, because they had alternate means of actually using alternate means of transportation, buses or trains or ferries or whatever. So the state actually switched the analysis requirements to focus on vehicle miles traveled. And so we don't have the direct link between if an intersection is delayed from CEQA, then you're actually required to fix that. But in reality, that's essentially what we would do as a town is to look at the impacts, the potential impacts. We're going to do the intersection delay analysis anyways, just to see what that effect is. And then you have to think about how to maybe, some things can be as easy as signal timing changes, changing the ways that the lights actually function. And other ways are more engineering, getting into actual engineering and figuring out different ways to allow for greater flows. It's going to take, our peaks are really around school hours, though. It's more, that's and so from that perspective, locating a lot of these sites close to the schools, frankly, and within easy walking or biking distance to a lot of schools can be a benefit because you're not contributing to that additional school hour traffic. But that's the real, when we see the peaks, that's what we're really seeing at this point is the school hour traffic, not necessarily the sort of commuting hour traffic, which is typically tied to the residential stuff.
All right, thanks. And it's Tam Bell now, right, versus Tam Ridge?
Oh, Bell Mount Tam now.
Thank you. Barbara, go ahead. Sorry. Do you have a question, Barbara?
Yeah, I had a question. Sorry, I had to unmute. So I attended 2 of the 6 housing element workshops, and I just wanted to really thank Adam for his excellent job in running those workshops. I thought you did a really good job of kind of handling all the questions and explaining the process. It's not easy.
Thanks, Barbara. Yeah.
And especially, the last one, there was a lot of pushback. Apparently, somebody really got in contact on next door with some of the neighbors and fired them up. So anyway, yeah, I think really you did a great job. My one question from that last workshop is Corte Madera still involved in challenging these kind of unreasonable housing numbers? Or have we I know we appealed the numbers in the beginning and the appeals were all turned down, but it happened to everybody. But are we still part of a larger effort to fight it, or we're just done? We're just like,
we're done. Well, from the RENA process, and what's you're allowed to sort of challenge through the actual process, we're done in terms of the appeal was filed, it was argued, it was turned down, and there's not really an appeal after that through the process. So that's all. And there hasn't been discussion of anything further. I'm sorry, that I'm aware of.
Thanks.
And there isn't really a formal process for it further. And it's a good point, though. I mean, all cities, this isn't just a Corte Madera, issue. Every city in the Bay Area is currently going through this. Every city in Southern California has just gone through this. And when I say this, these elevated numbers that were assigned to all of our cities throughout California really is what's happening. Sacramento, I think, just went through it as well. So it's not unique to Corte Madera. And I think we're, given what we've been provided, it's how to really find the best way to accommodate units. And again, it is over a period of time. And yeah, Fred, you talked about it isn't happening tomorrow. None of this happens tomorrow. I will say, you can look back right now in Corte Madera, starting with the Tam Ridge project. I mean, we have the Robin Drive project, Home Key. So with ADUs. Since 2017, within the next year, we'll have 300 units will have come online in Corte Madera. And so this has happened in Corte Madera. This is continuing to happen. I think that one of the important things to note, these aren't brand new sites, with the exception of that Robin Drive project, where there's nothing on them. They're all developed with some use today. So it's really about reuse of existing land that's already been developed into something else.
Adam, if I can remember too, the appeal process is kind of ironic, right? Because if, say we won and they said, okay, we'll reduce Corte Madera's numbers by 200 units, they shift those units over to another town or city, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't, yeah. And then, I'm sorry, Barbara, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and Woodside tried to use their mountain lions as a reason to protect the mountain lions. I guess we could try and say coyotes, but I think we need to give up and just kind of do the best we can. So.
That's the other. Adam, do you know if any town or city in California has ever sued the state over the housing has actually taken that far? And I know it's a slippery slope because to sue anybody like that, you're using public funds, which means we'd have to use Corte Madera taxpayer money to sue. You're taking away from projects, and you kind of look in the long run, again, it's not worth it. But do you know if there's any town or city that's actually sued?
Over the housing element, I'm not aware.
Yeah, okay.
So it works the other way around, I think.
Well, you're biting the hand that feeds you if you ask me. So, yeah.
It's a total double-edged sword. And Adam, what happens if, say, a year or 9 years from now, none of this housing gets built? And just say it's not due to the water district. It's just, I look at the economics of it. A developer's going to come in and build units. Obviously, they're doing it to make money. They're not doing it out of the kindness of their heart, unless it's a nonprofit that's looking at actually building affordable housing, which is a separate story. But if 9 years down the road, and out of 700 some odd units, we've added, just say 100.
Yep. Yeah. So a couple of things. One is, on the one hand, not much. We sort of repeat the process over in 8 years, and sort of basically start anew, and whatever the rules are at that point in time, sort of try again. On the other hand, there are now some regulations that kick in if you do not keep up with the actual construction of the units, the RENA number, then some regulations do kick in that were adopted in the last 3 or so years that start to basically try to create less regulatory hurdles. So take some of the discretionary processes away from the town, so that things can be built without design review, or things can be built without a review, essentially reviewed by any of the planning commission or the town council, and they would go straight to a building permit and be able to build. So on the one hand, if 100 units get built, that's 100 units, nothing happens. But you do start to strip away some of what are perceived to be the hurdles that are intending, making it challenging for developers to build. Now, I would say the town was one of a very few number of cities in the state to actually meet and keep up with the housing production over the last 8 years. And so none of those laws apply to the town, and likely won't apply until probably the midway point through the next cycle. So by maybe like 2025 or so. But that's just, those are sort of the consequences, it's not, but I think, anyways, there's not much more than that happens.
Okay. And then I know it seems like all the emphasis is put on the larger projects, but there's also, I call them the infill ones, right? Between ADUs and, which we'll talk about in a minute, SB9, which could allow, I'll say duplex in your backyard. How does that work? Because do you see maybe more infill, those projects coming into play versus some of the major ones? And then how does that affect neighborhoods also, which these fill-in type projects?
Yeah. So this gets a little bit wonky again, but so one of the things we don't just have the 700 plus units there. We have about half of that is required to be planned for affordable housing, low and very low income units. And the way the state says the way to do that is to zone properties at least 20 units an acre. If you do that, then they technically can qualify those sites for meeting low and very low income housing units in the town, which we have to by RENA. So that's why you see us focusing on multifamily development in terms of meeting the RENA, because those sites, along the highway and a little bit off the highway, but those commercial sites that we've talked about through the workshop series really are the ones that can be zoned at a little bit higher density because of their location and size, and also qualify for affordable housing under RENA, and really essentially we're putting more eggs in that basket rather than dispersing it all throughout town and the established residential neighborhoods. That's the strategy anyways. That doesn't preclude these other smaller infill projects from happening. In fact, the town will be counting as part of meeting our RENA accessory dwelling units. And we've seen a real surge in accessory dwelling unit construction in the last couple of years. I think this last year we just did a report. We had about 24 new ADUs in this last calendar year, 2021, that received building permits. 8 of them were at Robin Drive, but nonetheless, I mean that's significantly more than we've seen in the past. The year before, I think it was about 4 or 7. The year before that, so it was a jump this last year. So those will continue. Those have been quite received mostly positive. A lot of residents have seen value in adding those to their homes. I think the second part and the second one you were talking about was this SB 9, this new law, which allows these duplexes and splitting of lots and so on and so forth. Those also can count, but since it's such a new law, we haven't had any units built under those that state legislation. So it's a little bit harder to know exactly what's going to be accepted by the state housing and community development department, which brings up a good point. All of this strategy ultimately gets passed. We'll be coming to the council in midsummer, and basically asking to refer our draft housing element, including the strategy that I just talked about how we're going to meet RENA. We're going to be asking the council to be able to have staff to the state housing and community development department. So we pass that to them, and then they review it, and they're going to review essentially whether we've complied with the laws, but also whether some of the assumptions we've made with respect to how many units get built under each of these, the ADUs and the SB 9 projects get built as well. So, what we have done with respect to those types of projects is through the urgency ordinance that was passed recently with respect to SB 9 projects, and then in the previous years, we've developed ordinances for ADUs, is really try to make sure that if they are built, they're not out of character or scale. They're house scale buildings essentially, and they're also limited in the size they can be. So they're not sort of, there's obviously more construction and more of a building footprint on a lot, but they're not going to look totally out of character or out of scale with what other things that you see already in our single family neighborhoods. And so those are currently in effect, and those are things that we can apply.
Okay. And while we're on that, let's morph into SB 9 if we can. So correct me if I'm wrong, I like the high level summary. SB 9 allows a lot split, 60-40. And then with that, I can turn around, I want to say on the 40% and basically build 2 units up to 1,000 square feet each. I know there's like 4-foot setbacks and there's some other requirements. Does not require planning review by the Planning Commission. Flat out, it's a straight over the counter type application, has to meet our objectives and standards, fits in the box. And then you basically issue the permit. And under our urgency ordinance, if I can remember, we're going to notify the neighbors within 300 feet. But again, since it doesn't go to the Planning Commission, there's really no formal appeal process in place. I think the only process in place is, I think if you guys approve it, I think Todd or his designee will do a second level review, just make sure it complies with everything. And then boom, I go build my 2 units.
Yeah. That's a really good summary.
Thanks. So I guess a couple of questions. One, are you starting to see a lot of applicants for either lot split or to build units? That's the first question. I just based on the second one, so I'll let you answer that one first.
Yeah, so we received 5 applications for a lot split, and they're actually sequential. So it's not, that's how we're handling it with our process. So we have 5 applications for a lot split. We've had a lot of inquiries, a lot of others that are sort of just asking questions. No proposed development actually under them yet. Although when we talk to the people who are proposing this development, to this point, most people aren't thinking about duplexes. They're thinking about one unit on the other lot. That's, most of the people, actually all the people we're talking to are really local residents, homeowners. We're not speaking to, speculators or anything like that at this point. So, but that's really what we're hearing from people they want to do. And for whatever, they may have been precluded from splitting their lot in the past. The ADU route isn't exactly what they want, isn't appealing. This does allow people to sell off the other portion of the lot. So there are some advantages with the SB9 versus the ADU ordinance, even if you only want to build one unit. So,
okay. And then I know the town's been doing a much, I shouldn't say better, but a much better job about communications, getting messaging out and stuff like that. Do you think a lot of people in town are aware of SB9 and kind of the effects it could have and how it works, where all of a sudden, I don't come home at night and I look at my neighbors and they're doing construction and I'm kind of like, what's going on? I never really found out about this. I like asking the tough questions.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good question. I can tell you, I know that a lot of our neighborhoods were blanketed by a marketing letter asking, basically somebody, a surveyor, I think, making people aware of SB9 and the fact they could split their lots, so to be aware that way. But that's one of the reasons why we have that noticing requirement. You're not going to wake up and not know about it. At the very least, you'll have a notice that an application has been filed and somebody is seeking to develop pursuant to the SB9 and use those rules. It's not, frankly, much different than the ADU ordinance that exists today in that regard. So, but I can't say how many, frankly, we have, as you know, we've did probably the most outreach, I think, certainly that we've ever done in the planning department. And I would hazard a guess that even more broadly than that the town maybe has ever undertaken with respect to the housing element of that process. And we still have people all the time saying they weren't aware, and not aware of what is going on. So we have to explain that again and again. So it's, I think there's those, we can always do better, I think, or try to do better, but I think there's always going to be some folks who won't know what's going on until it actually happens next door. And at that point, they're going to call us and ask, well, how did this happen? And we'll explain. So, okay. But I do think there's been a lot of press, frankly, about it. So that's helpful. I mean, not our press as well. It's a lot of circulating widely throughout the state. So hopefully that helps and gets people's attention, at least, to try to understand sort of some of these land use rules that are coming from the state that are affecting us locally.
All right, thanks. And I think you guys have done a great job, because I know banners went around town regarding the housing element. And I think also you and Martha, I think we're at Town Center at a couple of the farmers markets there for 2 or 3 hours. Same thing with the little table outside, which I thought that was a different approach that I don't think you did the last time.
Yeah, we're going to do more of that as well.
Okay. You're not going to be outside with the sandwich board at all?
One of those trolley signs.
There you go.
Yeah.
Barbara, do you have a question? Can't tell she raised her hand. Okay. If nobody has comments, questions on either housing element or SB9, one last question for Adam. What's coming up next project-wise? I know we have the Residence Inn that's coming in. Again, I know still we just gave approval for that. There's the other smaller boutique hotel over by Marin Luxury Autos. What do you have after that? What's anything coming on board that you see in the future?
We don't have really bigger applications. I think we're going to be plenty busy with some of those construction projects that are ongoing, including Town Hall and including the hotel when that gets underway, and finishing up Robin Drive and the smaller hotel, but nothing really in the hopper other than just people asking about, we hear from developers and, it does, this whole process, not just in Corte Madera, but everywhere, it perks up the ears of the development community. And so they do ask questions, they do call us and ask, is this site, what's going on here? So people are sort of, we hear about from time to time, and I mentioned this during the workshop series, Macy's and the theater site, obviously, and some of the other ones that we've talked about during the house element process, but nothing, no major applications that I know of right now that are even in the pre-development phase, really.
I guess it gives you a little bit of a breather, even though it's a loaded type thing to say.
Well, it helps us work on the housing, the policy aspects. So it's a really big policy year, especially now that we got, that the hotel was approved, which was a big project. But it starts to turn it more into a policy on the planning side anyways. And building's going to be very busy with all the construction.
Barbara, I'm sorry, you had a question? Go ahead.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not about the housing element per se, but it's about construction and construction noise. Given the widespread amount of construction and tree cutting that's going on now in the town, including town hall remodel, which I know won't take place on the weekend, but a lot of home remodeling takes place on the weekend. And now that I have you guys in front of me, can I ask you, is there any chance you would consider amending the noise ordinance to ban construction at least one day of the weekend, or maybe 2 days of the weekend, so we could have some peace and quiet at least 1 or 2 days a week? We have a lot of construction in our neighborhood. I mean, every remodel takes at least a year these days. So
yeah. You want to take that one, Mayor Caesar or Todd?
I was going to turn it over to. I was going to give it to Todd.
Let's give it to Todd.
Thanks a lot. Hi, Barbara. Hey, the good news is your neighborhood is just looking awesome right now. A lot of good improvements. We had as you know, that was, the noise ordinance was, I want to say, a 3 or 4 year kind of discussion amongst staff, the community, and council. And they had a pretty good conversation on, the hours on weekends and what they would allow or not. We do have a pretty good turnover on the council now. It's something we could definitely raise to them and see if they want to, have staff bring some recommendations back to them. But right now, Barbara, really we're focused on, our code enforcement and relations. We have coverage on weekends now too with them of really just that education, making sure everyone's following the rules. And I think if we can keep them within our rules, my sense is that the majority of the council would keep the ordinance in its current structure. But again, I'm happy to get feedback from others on this call. And if it's something we want to take back to the council for a discussion, I'm happy to do that. That probably wouldn't happen until later this summer, just due to our current work plan. We have a pretty aggressive agendas over the next, 5 months. So, but I'm happy to work with you a little bit offline. Like you helped us before, Barbara, thank you, on our noise ordinance. I'm happy to continue the discussion and work with you on it. But again, right now, I think our focus, we put in a lot of money into it and effort, training, of just really focusing on our code enforcement to make sure at least people are following the current guidelines.
Yeah. And I understand that, and I appreciate that. But I was just kind of throwing it out as a possibility. because we're going to have, given if people are going to start dividing their lots and building ADUs, we're going to have more and more construction, which is a good thing if we're creating more housing, but it is, it does affect the quality of life in the neighborhood. So it's just something to think about.
Tom, maybe that is something, again, you're talking 5 or 6 months from now, maybe like September, October, later in the year, you could maybe bring back to council. And I know Jenna had a thumbs up, not a hands up, but a thumbs up on that.
And I'm sorry,
if possible.
Sure, you got it, Mr. Mayor. I think I'll work with Mike Moriarty for one, just to get a work with planning and building on the current projects out there and just keep some statistics of how we're doing, complaints and things like that, so we can have some data for the council and the community to discuss.
Okay, and that's the other question. How does that work on the weekends? If my neighbor is doing work on their house and I know they're not supposed to, it's the weekend. I know we have code enforcement with Michael's group. Do I call Michael's group? Is there an 800? How does that work?
Yeah, so you could call the main line. The best, so how we set that up, usually after hours. So basically Monday through Friday during business hours, you can call our code enforcement line. After hours and weekends, you would call Central Marin Police Authority. But what we do is we have on weekends, it's a lot of Saturdays and some Sundays, what we'll do is periodic checks and follow-up. So our code enforcement officer, Adam Wiley, knows all the construction sites in place. And so he'll actually drive to every one and just do a check during certain hours. And then if he's on duty, Central Marin Police would actually forward that call to him for follow-up. But really after hours at Central Marin Police Authority, you can call Central Marin Police Authority 24/7. You can also call our code enforcement line during business hours. But the difference with our code enforcement that I really appreciate is that they're proactive. So they're not waiting for your call. They know the projects that are out there. They know where the complaint areas are, and they're actually being proactive and going and checking those sites. And it's just not your normal business hours, right? In the middle of the day, of course, there's going to be construction. They're checking it early in the morning to see if they're starting early. Also at the end of the day, making sure they're shutting down like they're supposed to. And again, a lot of these just aren't by accident. There's usually a lot of phone calls, a lot of complaints. We'll work with the neighbors in that area to really come to a resolution. And so that's really the huge success of code enforcement. I've contemplated even changing their names. I don't really like the title. Really, they're just problem solvers. They'll get in there and every situation's a little different. But they've been pretty, I think we've seen on our side, Barbara, I don't know if you have because you're specific to your neighborhood, but I could tell you throughout town, it's been a really great resource for community members.
And then what are the ramifications if somebody is caught? I know you said code enforcement tries to work with neighbors, work with the contractor. Are there any, I want to say, teeth ramifications if somebody is really outrageous and it's just a pattern of behavior?
Yeah, so there's administrative fines that can be given to the contractor immediately by code enforcement, and they'll you'll usually get one warning, and then you'll get a citation. And also, we will then include Adam and his team that we're having a problem, and those are the the conditions for construction. So if they're violators multiple times, then planning would get involved and really take back their permit. We'll shut down the project.
Yeah, we have the ability to stop work.
Okay.
Aren't getting people complain. I will just say, put the parameters on sort of the noise, some of the policy considerations on the noise ordinance, not to get too much further into this, but oftentimes we're talking about the trade-offs, right, are between longer overall construction time period, because you may be missing a day or two on the weekends that you otherwise would have to complete a project. But on the benefit side is for neighbors is to have that respite at least once or twice a week during construction. The other thing that we ran into when we started talking about this was distinguishing between the hobbyist and the at-home sort of builder noise who's generating some noise on a weekend versus actual hired licensed contractors or bigger projects, and it gets a little bit fuzzy there. So just some other policy considerations that, these are why these things take time to really, it's not a sort of a real easy quick fix, because you end up having to unravel sort of these other policy considerations that you don't really intend to, may not have intended or considered in the first place, and then unintended consequences, just trying to avoid those when we put in place new rules.
And then because of supply chain issues, I don't know if that still is an issue, but have you seen projects just take longer, get stretched out more just because, again, supply issues are just trying to land, It's a good question. I mean, a lot of it is just depends on who's building. So I think the bigger, like the guys over at Robin Drive, they're going, they got a good schedule and a good, a good supplier, which is helping things. But I don't on those local projects, I don't think so. I think it's just you're paying more, and so actually probably the materials are coming to the higher resourced areas versus the lower resourced areas because of that. But I don't see a real huge impact on the length, other than more labor. It can be somewhat challenging sometimes, I think. But no, not generally. It's supply chain issues.
One thing I wanted to say, if we did ban it on the construction on the weekends, of course there would be an exception for emergencies. So
yeah,
I wouldn't. I'm not saying don't let it happen at all.
Yep,
Hobbyists, I understand too. So yeah.
Okay. Any other questions for Adam before we let him go back to his baseball game? Are they winning?
I don't know. I'm not actively watching the score.
You don't do what Todd does for the Sweet 16 and the Sweet 18, where he has like the two computers so you can watch one.
I did get a text though, so I did get a text that things were not going so well. But I don't say that. No, I really appreciate the opportunity and really enjoy getting the chance to sort of speak informally and casually with all of you, and yeah, Mayor Casisa, you bring some of the tough questions. I like it. Good for you. All right, so it's not I guess my son's not the only one playing hardball. It's come to Mayor Casisa's chat and you play hardball as well over here. That's good. I like it.
The good news is, since we only do this once a month, you'll probably only be here this time, and that may be it. Maybe we'll have you back before the end of the year when you get closer to the housing element, finalizing it.
All right.
But no, thanks, Adam. We appreciate your time. And everybody has your email address and maybe your phone number too, so they know we should talk to you.
Thanks everyone for joining us.
All right.
Hey, Adam, what is our hard stop for tonight? Because I know we have a planning commission meeting right after this. So what?
Yeah, it's 7 tonight. It'd be good to get a little prep time in here for that. So
okay.
We got some presentations going tonight. Actually, tonight, for those, I'll make one plug. We're doing a workshop on it's again into the wonky stuff, but it's called Inclusionary Housing Ordinance, and we're going to be talking about essentially how much of multifamily and even smaller projects, but multifamily housing projects like apartments are required to reserve or required to have affordable housing included within them. So that's a policy we're going to be working on over the next couple of months and bringing that before the Planning Commission and Town Council for formal hearings and approvals. But tonight's a workshop and a discussion to get sort of information on those ordinances, which are really important from the standpoint of, as you said, even if it's not a 100% nonprofit built affordable housing project, we can still get workforce housing, affordable housing built in our other multifamily projects through like a mixed use proposal. So that's sort of the conversation tonight.
Okay, thanks. And Patty has a question, and I think I know what she's going to ask.
No, you don't.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Patty.
What Adam just brought up about the inclusionary housing, I know that the condo where I live has inclusionary units, and they have a limited equity. And I know that other towns have other units that don't have a limited equity. So is this something that's going to be reconsidered?
I'm not
have
sure
an
I totally
cap?
understand the limited equity part, you mean that basically the profits that they can make from selling are capped? Yes. So in a for sale, if it's a condo and it's required to be affordable, they will have limited equity required.
Into perpetuity?
Not perpetuity. So that's one of the things that we will be talking about. So some of our older projects had like 35 years. Now it's pretty standard. In the last 20 years, we've gone to 55 years. And now a lot of cities are going to 99 years. And so that is part of potentially updating the ordinance as well. So yeah, in fact, some of these units will be basically expiring from their affordable obligations in the coming decade. Not many, but there are a few that actually over here behind me on Lucky Drive. I know it's one in the upcoming pretty soon. I forget exactly when. So that is.
But then they're lost to affordability. I mean, the whole idea is to provide affordability, yes. And if you don't do it into perpetuity, then they're lost.
Yeah. So that is part of the conversation that we can have, because I think one of the things that I'd like to explore as part of this ordinance update is we do collect housing in lieu fees, basically, which are in a affordable housing fund. And right now, those funds are restricted by ordinance to only be used for new construction of affordable housing. But potentially, and this is something I want to explore further with our attorneys, is can there be other uses for that, such as preservation of units and things like that. So part of the conversation as well. And there's a lot of different pieces to this conversation. But those are important ones that you raised. Yeah.
Okay. And Adam, we're in spring now, so you need to update to blossoms instead.
That's right. I'm sorry.
Autumn leaves. Thank you.
Thanks, Patty. And again, thanks, Adam.
Sure. All right.
We'll let you go grab something to eat and take a break.
Thanks. All right. Take care.
Last part, which we'll just spend about 5 minutes on, is town council updates this last month. And I'll just go through this quick, just some highlights. We did have Brett, and I always probably mispronounce his last name, from Larkspur Corte Madera School District, gave a great presentation on what's going on with the elementary and middle schools. And we're looking at having him come back on an annual basis. I just think it's a good idea to do that. We did pass a policy regarding the digital marquee. We also are in the process of hiring another building inspector, which should help smooth out that process. And then the other larger ticket item, which will come before town council again, maybe not next meeting, but the meeting after, just because we have a packed agenda, has to do with campaign reform. And then there's two aspects with that. Is we're looking at, I want to say, lowering the individual limit, which right now is, I believe, is 4,900 or so, down to 500 that an individual can contribute to a campaign. Again, that's locally within Corte Madera, and also voluntary individual limits, which would be up to, I believe, almost 5,000, which is the state limit. But again, that'll come back to town council. It's being refined, and it'll come back to us. With that, let me turn it over to Todd for his updates.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're running out of time, so I'll just give a couple of quick updates in case anyone has any questions. Again, we are planning full go for the 4th of July parade this year, so we're excited about that. We're gonna work with the Chamber of Commerce and maybe mix it up a little bit, but use a lot of our summer events our spring and summer events leading into the 4th of July to really tell the story of all of the volunteerism and all the groups that we have, and really try to get, coming out of COVID, get everyone excited again about all of our good, the service, community-wide, and see if we can get some, we can build those numbers and just get everyone excited again, staff and volunteers together moving forward, leading into the 4th of July, and coming up with something creative for that event. And since we'll have most everybody there in our town, doing something special. So more to come there. Good news on the building side. Our building permits, we're fully caught up, and we're starting to see Turnaround times that were in the 2 to 3 week range go to 10 to 14 days turnaround time on reviewing documents and inspections, which is where we really want to be from a number standpoint. So that's really positive and encouraging. We've been, as you know, trying to improve that over the last 2 years. And with our new building official on board, we're starting to see the fruits of our labor. We're starting to see that service delivery really be impactful for our community. And I think that's one area that I know the council's been really focused on this last year. And then one other thing, we didn't touch on it on Adam's call, but a lot of these things that we're talking about on the housing side, not necessarily on the RENA number side, but the state is pushing everything to administrative reviews and really streamlining it. And one thing that we've been talking about and trying to focus on statewide, we're going to be one of the first agencies to really do this, is to put objective criteria into our decision-making administratively if we were to say no due to safety reasons. And those safety reasons would be some of the areas on the hillside, not all the streets and housing units on the hillside, but there are specific areas that we're working with the fire department, the police department, and our town attorney, and as well as Adam and his team, on identifying those areas to potentially, if we were to say no, to objectively be able to say no, and something that would hold up in the court of law. So we're looking at bringing an urgency ordinance to council, I believe the second meeting in April for review. So more to come on that. And I encourage everybody up on the hillside that may be interested in this conversation to attend that meeting. If you have any questions, you can, I'm happy to talk to you offline as well. And I think, for right out, and the other thing is the second meeting in April for, I think, both the Planning Commission and the council, we're going to have our first in-person meeting, and we're going to start in-person meetings with the hybrid ability. So you can still watch them via Zoom, but you can also attend those meetings in person. And now that things have kind of calmed down, we'll still work towards that open house, maybe in the next 30 to 45 days, and have a couple of open house events where people can come see where we're at and check out our new facilities. That's all I have.
Really quick, where are we at with the new town hall project?
New town hall project. So it is out to bid, and we hope to bring those bids to council for consideration, I believe the second meeting in April. So that's that. And if the council does approve, if we get some good numbers and good bids and the council approves that, we would move ahead for possible demolition of the building in May. And then again, if we were on that track, we're looking at completion the summer of 23.
Okay, thanks. Barbara, you have a quick question? I don't know if you're mute. You have your hand raised, but you're muted.
Okay, so can you mention the Casa Buena open house? That's coming up in April. Do you guys know the date?
Something I don't have it off the top of my head. I think it's the first week in May, actually.
Let me look.
Rebecca will look it up really quick, and I apologize. Well, she's doing that. Does anybody have any other questions before we have to drop off? And Todd, I just thought of, which is, it is what it is, but it's kind of sad. Then this would be if that building if the town hall got demoed in May, it'd be the first time in how many years that there'd be a 4th of July parade without the town hall being there.
I mean, you bring up a good point. So that's
it is what it is. Because
that's going to be a consideration. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a consideration for a parade route too. We're going to have to think about that a little bit. It's on the fly. I don't think we've given that a lot of thought. So that's going to actually have to be we're going to have to talk about that one.
Yeah, I just want to cut through the neighborhood.
Yeah, the open house is on May 6th at 1 to 3.
Yeah. Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Todd? Yeah, James, go ahead. I think you're muted.
Okay. Just an observation. I would hope that the council can and all the meetings continue Zoom meetings after they start in-person meetings, because it is so much easier for all of us to participate that way. Thank you.
As far as I know, they will be hybrid. So it will either be in person or you can still Zoom in. So they'll be both ways.
Good.
Thanks.
That's good. Yeah, it's the gift that it's one of the only gifts of COVID that it really, the technology and really for us to be able to have these community chats and council meetings via Zoom like this has really helped us with engagement. So we definitely want to continue that.
Yeah, and I'm actually in, I want to say, the new town council chambers, and on the siding on both sides, there's 2 85-inch TV screens, which I assume that'll be the Zoom part. So if there's no other questions, okay. Well, again, I appreciate everybody's time. Hopefully you found this informational and beneficial. So I appreciate your time. And the next one will be, again, it's the 4th Tuesday of every month. And I'm still working on our guest, but we're hope to have it public safety related. I'll just throw that out there like that. So again, thanks for everybody's time. Have a good night.
Thank you.
All right.